I would like to welcome everyone for today's talk and talk about startups in times of COVID-19 and how they tackle the situation in Africa and Switzerland. The organizer, SARECO, is a publicly funded initiative, and I welcome particularly today Roman Kern and Dercio Afonso da Silva as representatives of our sponsor. For today's talk, I'm very much pleased to present Alfredo Cuanda, founder, business designer, and CEO of Ideario Hub in Maputo in Mozambique, and Jordi Montserrat, managing partner of Venturelab Switzerland and business angel. I would like to invite Alfredo now to the stage and ask you, Alfredo, so how can we imagine the current situation of startups in Maputo and in sub-Saharan Africa at large? Alfredo, please.
Thank you. Hi, everyone, and thank you for this opportunity to kind of share a little bit of what's going on this part of Africa, but all Africa overall. I think at some degree we are facing the same challenges, but and will require us to kind of share what we are learning in our process. I'm coming here from two perspectives. One is like my hub is part of Afrilabs, which is this major community of hubs in Africa. And also talk in a perspective of me individually traveling across Africa prior to the COVID, and what is my feeling right now, that the thing that is happening after these 3 months of analyzing tendencies, those success case stories, and so on. So as we started, and first, just like contextualize, so the next slide, what is Afrilabs as our overall, and then understand the relevance of Afrilabs in the African contents. Adrian, can you go to the next slide, please? To understand the scope of Afrilabs, the most important thing is just like we are on almost like 95% of all the African countries, which is a good kind of like indicator that we understand or have a pulse of what's happening in Africa. Being 202 hubs, that is also the kind of we have a lot of boots on the ground that is trying to kind of get a sense of what's happening, but at the same time, Afrilabs is in a better position to understand and kind of articulate what it's been happening so far, the ways in an individual level of the countries, but also in a collective effort to what are the patterns that we are identifying. So at the moment that I'm speaking, just like the big question is just like, what is COVID? Next slide, Adrian. What is COVID at the end of the day? For us is like, we need to understand COVID as this stress test that it's happened at so many levels and all of our operating systems. Doesn't matter if it's just like political one, professional ones, individual, social, healthcare, every operation system that we use as individuals is being tested. So at the same time, we are seeing that like those critical flaws are the one that for many years we took for granted. And now that is not an option anymore. So, and then if I talk in case of Mozambique in particular, it was just like, this case is just like we are on the level 3 of the lockdown, level 3 or 4, and we cannot go to level 4. And the reason that we cannot go to level 4, we just look at South Africa that went there and tried out and backlash like in a way that the government was not expecting. And we can see that like some countries could implement in a much lighter level, but it required a different position from the government to actually be able to kind of like cover most of the issues that range from that, which is from informal settlements, how that works from them, and the hospital, food, and so on. So Mozambique right now is one of the lowest kind of cases. I think we are roughly about 100 cases and so on. I would say lower, and that's a good thing, because If that was much higher, there was like, at this level, I think we will be in serious kind of situation that we couldn't kind of answer like as quick as possible at so many levels, not in the government, but also on the private side. And that also ties to the challenge that I put it here, that what are the challenges that are being faced right now, that is not just the business that are facing, it happens on the ecosystem, and the government also is dealing with the same ones. So when we go to address the challenges, Adrian, can you go to the next slide? As it goes to address the challenges as the first approach, I think one of the major challenges is the collective adaptability. Why? Because at the level that this COVID kind of challenge, it requires everyone to come together, like at all institutions, all levels of society, professional ones. Everyone needed to come together as one. Everyone needed to be aligned. Everyone needed to speak the same language. Everyone needed to articulate properly what are their position, what they needed to do to actually, the whole machine to actually move. So on this, we identified that as a sub kind of challenges, we find the return on relationship. The first thing that we talk about return on relationship, it was tied to the relationship between governments and the society, the relationship between the employees and their own kind of in their own businesses, the relationship between customers and those businesses. That is the one thing that we have seen, that a lot of companies that are in trouble, they have a poor relationship with their customers, they have poor relationship with their internal employees, and that was called upon everyone to come together, but that was in existence. So taking a look at this was the first point that I was seeing that was a pattern no matter where part of the industry came. The second thing was just like, this is a design problem. When I say this is a design, because this is a system design problem. What we are facing here is like, we are understanding this, that everything is affecting everything. It started with the health part, it goes to economic part, it goes to social part, like everything is connected. And the way that we design those systems is what is being challenged right now. So we cannot think the same way that we used to think. That it's calling us to rethink completely different kind of approaches. And the way that we used to interact is changed forever. That will not be just a one thing off. And now we need to understand that we will design taking COVID as one of the measures of stress test to what's ahead, what we can put it out there. And one of the constraints of collective adaptability also was the informal economy, which is one of the main challenges in Africa. With the majority of the economy in Africa is almost informal economy. And that is not neither bad or good thing. But the problem is those that live on the daily base income was the ones that create most of the stress in this area. Because if you shut down, you put them to be on the lockdown at home, just like that will create a lot of stress because their income was just a short kind of gain. And all countries needed to first deal with this before even start to understand what kind of lockdown could be in place. Those that could afford, they went and put a lockdown in place. Those that couldn't afford, they measured to have a mixed approach of kind of like ask people to behave using kind of restrictions and so on to actually to get to the situation that we are in today. And that was the lucky scenario that Mozambique is on the level 3, which is like half lockdown, half we can have some restriction measures and so on. So the collective adaptability was the one thing that we couldn't foresee, and it still is a biggest challenge that we are seeing in our economies, not only in Mozambique, but across the continent. And as for the next slide, the second biggest kind of challenge that we can identify, Adrian, can we go to the next slide? It goes to accountability, because at one level, we require everyone to come together, but at the individual level also, it's still one of the challenges that we need to address. So we put down 3 things. One is action transparency, like those that are saying what we have to do, what are the interests at the end of the day, This is why certain governments were challenged to kind of like articulate better what they were putting. Some government, they will put information, but people will not acknowledging. So who has the authority and what capacity they will orientate people? That also happens in the businesses. Those that are leaders need to understand that, like, do people listen to me when I say that this is the thing that need to happen or not? And also the verified information. I'm not talking just about fake news, but I'm talking about who verifies the information that it's coming out. When a country says that this is just 10 cases, who will verify that? So we need to trust them, but that becomes a challenge. Are we in a safe zone or not? And then some countries ended up showing that they were missing a couple of the numbers. We were relaxed, and now we need to adjust really quickly. And last but not least is about the data. Who owns the data that we put at the end of the day? We take decisions based on data, but at the end of the day, Africa has a huge problem of not owning that data, not understanding how to manage this kind of like the infrastructure to create and manage and read and take decisions based on this data. And that also was one of the key points that was presenting right now. At first, we needed to go out to see international sources to know what's happening in our own countries. Right now, I think like we've raised to the challenge, and we are having more and more local information that we can gather from different sources. So that is more or less the two kind of challenges that we have seen that is tied to not only businesses, but the whole ecosystem is facing the same one. And it's the kind of challenge that will continue to happen in the foreseen future. And we need to be aware of those challenges to what are the opportunities that are coming ahead. Those are my kind of like overview this far.
Yeah, thank you very much, Alfredo. It's very interesting and challenging in that sense also. First overview and first round. And I welcome now Jordi for now giving us insights on the Swiss situation. So are the challenges similar? What are the differences? So how is the situation? How can we imagine the situation for startups in Switzerland at this certainly very, very challenging times? Jordi.
Thank you very much, Erich, and welcome to everyone. So, and thank you as well to Alfredo for his great introduction and addressing some of the topics which I think definitely are going to touch us in the future with this new structuring of information, of value chains, as you mentioned. I think of many of the topics you addressed. My approach to this presentation, or what I want to share a little bit, is effectively how the startups and the challenges here in Switzerland and how we as a support organization have been experiencing these with the startups. With a small note that I like to share, which is maybe a bit personal. As an entrepreneur, I did my first startup just before or before the bubble, the famous, for those who remember, it was the first bubble crisis back in '99, then back in 2007 went through the other crisis. So each of them, of course, has its specifics. It's difficult to compare, yet there are a few situations or a few trends and the patterns which you can identify. This is probably what I will be sharing right now as well. But maybe if we go to the next slide, just so to share the first point, I think that was for me. Probably some of you have read this article that came out from Sequoia, which was called the Black Swan. And if you're not familiar with the expression, the Black Swan is this thing that people are claiming it exists and will happen, but nobody knows when and where we will discover it or have it happen. And this was the case of this crisis, which suddenly hit, even if we partly saw it coming, it just really came. And I think one of the big characteristics is the duration or the visibility on this crisis, and it's really the uncertainty of how long and where it will last. That is one of the big things that is affecting us, affecting our planning. All of the startups which are here, and it will come to my recommendations later of how this is impacting or how the behavior around such situation are impacting, and that's, I think, is really one of the big challenges, especially for startups where time is of essence. And that's this duration thing where we are, all of us, deciding now where and how do we move forward with fragile situations, or I would say fragile backgrounds and resource. The fact that we don't know how long and how it will rebound over the time makes it difficult. It froze for us. The big challenge was also the freezing on multiple fronts, and both on customers, investors. Even if I have to say that we see some rejoicing news, I'll come back a little bit. The investment situation or the investment activity has not fully frozen. Typically, if I recall back in 2000, it was a full freeze. Everything in IT, you could hardly see anything. Still here, we see some encouraging news. People are still active across the globe. I can share a little bit later on this one. And definitely, one question you will have, all of you raising funds here, is the conditions of fundraising become more difficult. I say not fully frozen, but the conditions, the term sheets, the risks that the investors are willing to take, or how much they expect to have guarantees and protection for their investments, are increasing. So that definitely creates a difficult situation for the entrepreneurs who might have to accept such conditions. Maybe we go to the next slide. So here it was just to show illustrating what happened in Q4 when the crisis was starting. We had a lot of deals, but a lot less money. And here we are sharing what we are tracking in terms of deal activity in Switzerland. And what was interesting is what end of year we saw that we had quite a few deals being closed, but actually much less money being invested than in Q1. And I think this trend is continuing now in Q2. We don't have all the full numbers, but we see that the trend of a number of deals is coming back down again. And the amounts, and I think that's one of the big characteristics is less money being invested on per rounds. People are much more cautious now. I think the hunting for funding is around hunting for continuation, or for I wouldn't call it survival money, but really expanding the roadway in order to see where this crisis will lead us, and making sure that the projects, or the best projects, are continuing. Next slide. We are actually in this. And maybe here you can give the full slide, please, Adrian. We were having here a very nice talk with multiple investors in Switzerland who went through the assumptions that entrepreneurs should be working with and how it impacts now. And I think this is quite generic across all countries. I mean, it applies to Switzerland, but talking to multiple partners across the globe, from China to the US to Africa. I mean, those things are applying today for everything that has to do with funding, particularly in the private. Where the founders had still quite a few opportunities. Now it's really investors, those who have the money, who are driving the conditions, and discussions on valuations are happening. As mentioned, it is a smaller rounds than initially expected. I went through these situations with a few entrepreneurs, and actually it gave several told me yes, they had to renegotiate for entrepreneurs' decision on how they want to address this. There is something as whether you are in a continuous funding or whether you are in an early first stage funding. For this, we will come later at the state support, because that's really important. I think during this period, being a first-time funded company, we have to be clear that it will be a difficulty. So we are working very closely with the startup to make sure they find early-stage resource at different innovation boosts. That's what that will sing. And then I just want to share there is something around, of course, looking for alternatives. We see a surge of tools such as convertible notes for the entrepreneurs who are with these delaying the next, the next points of valuation, and just bringing on board the money they need to go through that period until we can assess how long, what is the real impact, because the big difficulty is, and I really liked Alfredo telling us about this new domain, new normal, as people call it today, until we can assess what it really looks like in terms of building relation, international business, which is one of the challenges that is coming here. Next. One of the questions that I had to continue, and I think that's really, I focused on those challenges now, with as mentioned, adapting to a long time to the funding, which will be really a difficult challenge, and probably what to do. Later I think we'll come to some recommendations also, and discussions on investors and customers. Yet at this stage, I think yes, it will be difficult. But what are the good things or the opportunities that we see for the companies? And the first one, I have to say, even for the startups, is it provided quite a strong internal push to companies to really adapt, to really bring this digital transformation about. So not only rethinking the model, but adopting faster than prior, including customer and corporates, pushing towards new solution, which with the agility that many of the entrepreneurs have, it offers the opportunity to basically enter or push some first internally to the customers, and also internally, to the employees, and then to potential partners to adopt new ways of working. And this we have seen with some of our startups, and including, I would say, us as a company. The customers, for those who were frozen, because I mean many corporates were actually being slowed down in their activities, offered many opportunities to basically being reachable. Some people typically through LinkedIn, through many marketing channels. So all the time that people could not spend on real sales, we were telling them, and we had some good push of saying that's really the time where you can invest now into marketing, into building your database, because of course the activity will pick up at some point and you will have to build your database. So invest your time into this one. I, however, told the people when you have the chance, advance your product development, even rethink of alternatives. And in terms of product development, this was the case. Some companies in the software base could advance the features, advance the product, everything you can maintain from your development base. And it's the opportunity actually, as the times are now quieter in the sense for the dev team, to advance and to continue this strong development. And I know the situation is extremely different from countries to countries, and in Africa, not all the countries have state-funded program. In Switzerland, we had the chance to have several state-funded program, or even a system through a bank loan, a guaranteed from the state to help the companies. That was partially adapted to the startups in order to support. But here I'm also thinking of all the supports coming through the grants, the universities, where many companies were able to run. I see the European Union as well has EIC accelerator grants, and that they really pushed that solution forward through that period for many companies to be able to benefit from it. This was the case when with many of our startups in Switzerland, and it was the case for also I heard across Europe, many companies we are in contact with. So the state definitely, I think, is playing a role and has a role to play with maintaining the innovation. For companies who already have investors, I think you don't have to forget, you have to be at top of the list. I mean, those investors in the next month will have to ensure or to decide which company they want to ensure, or they want to really reinvest in order to allow them to continue. And for this, it's important that you really keep the communication, that you really keep and push on the progress that you're doing, in order for them to have you at top of the list when they have to make their reinvestment decision. Because that's one of the big worries, not right now, but I think towards the end of the year and beginning of next year, according to how the situation evolves, that some of those hard decisions will need to be taken, and your existing investors will be the first source, if anything, to help you support. And then, of course, many competitions people are using, but this was quite similar. So maybe next slide. Continued on this, I think here I'm jumping a bit on the recommendation already, but what is really important, and this we work from the beginning already from the past few months, but I encourage companies to keep in that front, maybe except for those who really were in the scope of saying we are able now to address new customers. We made a survey, maybe here a small parenthesis, we made a survey on our startups, and about 15% it opened actually new opportunities for them to develop. About 15% were more or less stable. They could manage to continue because they were already very much digital or had products we could continue. But 70%, the rest, the remaining, were hit and strongly slowed down, either in their development or even in their commercial activity. So for them, the big work was to take any measure which allows them to cut costs. And I think that's really an important point. Looking first at the Thaler's team and in system in Switzerland, we could use a lot of the unemployment schemes in the short term, and we actually have links at the end of these presentations which might be interesting for a couple of you. For the rest, I think it's really a discussion with your team, really push that you have to maintain the team together. It's a core asset, but that you are able to discuss with them how you can delay the payment, use the cash you have at hand in order to last. Better to cut now, and then if things pick up in 2 months from now, to pay at once all the salaries delayed, if this is acceptable for your team or for some members of your team, different gradations, than to say we keep it going and then you are out of money shorter. The second one will be rebuilding for the Swiss situation for the startups. I mean, rebuilding actually as much as inputs as they can. I won't explain or extend too much. I think the slide is self-explanatory in order to expand or to really be able to rebound, because rebounding will be everything. And the next two slides, because actually I covered everything at this time, are adapting your company. So I think, Erich, for me, we can skip the next two slides and we can come back later in order to give the word back to Alfredo on how to adapt, or those are more recommendations already, which might come later in our discussion.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Jordi.
You're welcome.
So now back to Alfredo. If you are available and ready, yes, thank you for being here. So we have heard now very intense insights of the situation. So in terms now of opportunities, so what does the African market hold in opportunities in these difficult times for startups?
Yeah, as for right now, I think Afrilabs is one of those organizations that it didn't foresee this kind of the actual situation that we were happening, but it ended up being well positioned to be the one of the top organizations to actually be able to capitalize of what Africa has to offer. That is the opportunities that we need to see. We need to see as a whole, not just as individual of each country, because there's a lot of similarities here, but at the same time, the kind of like the single African market, which is what African Union is also rooting for, and that will give us a new leverage of opportunity at the same time. So here we need to understand that we might be 54 countries, but at the same time, just like we are this time of COVID, we see more and more connections. We see the rise on mobile connections. We saw kind of like a little bit of stress also in people getting access to internet to actually see what's out there and so on. So if we go to the next slide, we can understand what opportunities can be unlocked out of that. The first is we need to understand when we're talking about innovation, innovation needs to be on a value chain innovation, because what happens here, unless we start to understand that startup build up and scale up needs to be in the African way, needs to be bound to what are the characteristics that we have that are so unique that provides a lot of value and advantage, we cannot just as a collective kind of win. So we see this in three kind of verticals. One is assets digitization. I think like this is one of the opportunities that we are seeing, like in what ways we can bring a lot of legacy, indigenous, and other forms of assets can kind of like be in a digital form. And a lot of the companies that are winning right now are starting to take this and kind of like implement in a better way. We can also understand the industry accelerator is starting to become a reality. Just about today, I was in a meeting with an institution that is on the kind of day where microcredit kind of institution that it's open industry acceleration in agro services, just to focus on that and kind of like have a better pipeline understanding where to put every dollar, where to maximize every dollar. That is also one of the trends that we are seeing and opportunities for the African markets, and we will see more and more acceleration specific on the industry kind of aligned to specific industries where they can improve the ecosystem, but just focus on one niche where they can put every single piece of effort there so we can all win. And the third one is the policy. I cannot stress enough that Afrilabs is doing a great work on this, and more organizations are starting to understand that unless we improve the policies that are in place, all the dollars, all the effort that startups are doing and so on do not generate the maximum return. It's like, as much as I want to, policy is the one thing that not only companies need to understand that every part of the ecosystem needs to understand how policies affect that. Unless we can affect the policies, most of the institutions that we are putting on the market, they will fall short. And this is one of the complaints of a lot of international investors when they come to Africa, is that those policies are not aligned to maximize the capital returns and also improve the ecosystem. So this is one of the key points that when we ascend the value chain, what are the policies that affect the value chain and how we improve it, that we can kind of like create capital, create gains, and also move forward from here. And kind of a COVID also accelerated that, because shows that our the kind of like, we want to improve on a lot of things, but the policy were not there. And that's the kind of, oh, we need to take a step back and understand what policies need to innovate here right now, or facilitate to kind of enable us to move faster. So that is the one also opportunity that we are seeing from businesses, governments, and other institutions. As for the next slide, we can see it like, we need to understand the concept of asset-light businesses. This is one of the concepts that we take here and there, hit and miss, but the majority of the companies that are winning right now in terms of startup, they have this philosophy also. And more now more than ever, just like we need to understand this, how we can work kind of like produce the best result possible with less assets as possible. So that is where we try to understand the concept of co-creation. Like, we can all win if we understand what part of this chain we can actually be and invest on. And that will become more and more a visual thing. That will become more and more the driver of what kind of business we're putting on the market. So we can understand from servitization, productization, and platforms to be the kind of like new drive of what kind of business will come out of Africa starting this year, and what shifts in the kind of the legacy of the business that are being operated in the market that are fading right now. They will shift to one of those three kind of approach. They will use more the resources like intellectual properties or other properties that they have that was sitting down there, and start to become more lean and evaluate that. Even in a perspective of an investor don't want to kind of invest in a heavy machine. You want machines that are lean, that can adapt as fast as possible. And that is one of the things that we are being called as more and more toward asset-light business, and even asset-light governments. Government needs to be light also. That is also one of the things that we can address and see how governments can be more nimble, more effective, and operate like a startup in some degree. And my last slide will go for a couple of the highlight points that I think can be takeaways, and where to invest, where to consider, where I see the most opportunities coming out. The one is just like the whole situation that it's happened, no matter it's in Mozambique, it's in the rest of the continent or in the world, it's like, it's just telling us we need to invest more in people. That is what the underlying here. And we need to invest in well-being, education, and diversity and income. Those are the things that no matter what economy you're in, you are gravitated towards that. In Africa, it's still the same. And we expect to see more and more initiatives around that. And the second side is just invest in research and development, because I need to traveling across the Africa got me to understand that research and development is one of the weakest points in African, it's like startup businesses and even established companies and so on. It's like having more research and development, having more funds to do research and development, or tie fund to research and development to some degree. It's someone that I expect to see more and more. The IP also is one of the things that we need to understand and have better frameworks, because there's a lot to leverage on IPs that come from Africa. AI and policies are the kind of like the way that I see what's ahead, even to improve the situation that we are in right now. So as summarized, the key challenge for us is collective adaptability, because at the end of the day, we all need to adjust at some degree, but we need to learn as fast as possible from one another. Doesn't matter if you're here in Maputo or you're in Switzerland, like, doesn't matter. Just like, we need to adapt collectively, and we need to share ongoing experiences, not just one case of, oh, we won, this is the perfect scenario. No, that's the thing. And the second thing is the value chain. The big opportunities here is just to, how do we understand the value chain and we start to have a better investment, better solutions, design better systems at the end of the day. So those are my takeaways in consideration. Those are the opportunities that I see. This is where I see also where we are going at the end of the day, and what COVID ended up bringing to the surface more than anything else. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Alfredo. This is truly interesting, and I think the key point really mentions this readiness also to learn from each other, and to open this field of knowledge exchange. So thank you very much, both speakers. We are a bit over time, but I hope that our participants are still bearing with us. It's the first edition of webinars that we are doing, so you might excuse some of these developments, but I would be happy now to call in participants interested in asking questions to our speakers. And I would also like to invite you now to please turn on your videos so that we can see you and interact as if we would interact in a seminar room or in a workshop room. And so please come forward with your questions. And I would say that yeah, maybe a good 5 minutes now should be left for questions and answers, so not to hold everyone back for too long. And so please, I would like to invite you now to ask your questions.
Maybe I can start with a question, break the ice. No.
Very good, Erich.
I would like to ask you if you could shortly sort of state the factors that you see that would enable a young startup to dynamically change their business model now to adapt to, well, for example, Corona-specific cash influx, or if you think the other way around, like for which companies is it worth it in a moment to keep burning their cash in order to stick to their original ideas?
I can take, or I mean, Alfredo, if you feel jumping in, I mean, so dynamic adaptation, I would say, is a constant mechanism. With the startups, as you know, are constantly pivoting, or I mean, not constantly, but they evaluate the market and they have this ability to see how they can do it. I think that at the early stage is really exposing themselves to the customers, because that's what will have the most impact onto the market. This is what will have the most impact to how they do this. Now in the current specific situation, and this is you mentioned maybe not only COVID, but I think it is still something that people have to evaluate, and also for the long term, because Alfredo mentions quite a few points which I think are relevant on how whatever happens, these things are going to be long-term impacted, you know, even when the crisis or when the whole thing, I would say, allows us to go back to a normal activity, some of the ways of working will be changed anyway. The tools to do this, I think you have on one hand, you have, of course, academical tools, you know, simulations of business model, you have some processes by which you constantly reevaluate how you are managing your startup and look for new options. For me, the key is really, and that's really the best address every time you are with companies and with startups, is use even this period now to actually be as close as possible to the people, the customers you plan to serve, because they are really the ones who will give you the direction on on which they think that the future will be evolving, and for themselves, and that's the people you will have to serve. So that's for me. I hope I was able to answer your question. It's a challenging. I know it's challenging. So do multiple business model generation if you need to, impact with the customers if you can, with your partners. That's really where you have to explore, I think, the most options. Alfredo, I leave it as well to you.
Yeah, in a short sense, what we have understood from the process, like companies normally are on 3 stages. Either they're trying to validate the problem, either they're trying to validate the solution that they're in, either trying to validate their fit in the market itself. So what ended up happening, that is a loop cycle. At some stage or not, you go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So one thing is just like at this stage, it's like you can react to retract and start to kind of like, you can fire your employees. You can like start to managing how much you spend and so on. But there is one thing that it's happening right now, because this, it's given you a freedom at certain degree to push a reset button and you start to experiment as a default mode. So you never take the reality that you're in for granted. So what if instead of just like you have 20% of your company to be always on the lookout for experiment a new way of doing business. So have these 2 ways of approach. Yes, you can be slower to react to what's happening, but at a certain degree, you need to look to reinvent yourself every time. So that's the kind of the 2 ways that you're gonna have to understand that it's a normal now. Always try to improve yourself 20% every single month and so on. So the next time that you need to change will not be something drastic and new. You will be, oh, we need to adapt to a new reality. That's something that we do. Let's go and move forward. That is the kind of a thing, because people are afraid of the unknown right now. They never had been challenged to change. So now change is the default mode. So how do we react to that? I don't know. Then I freeze. Then if I freeze, the market is still moving. Whether you like it or not, the market is still moving. So you don't have time to just sit and just stay there. So implement this in your DNA. Every time we assume that we're gonna kill our company in the next month. So how we stay relevant. So keep having that loop of a mind. So every single day, if you put this in a DNA of the company, I see the company succeed to many years, because the change will happen every single month and so on. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Very interesting webinar. I hope that we continue to. My question is about waste to energy investment in Africa. Waste to energy. I think that there is many opportunities to invest in Africa in terms of biomass energy, bioenergy, waste to energy. And I need to improve our communication between European and Swiss company, which are interested to study the possibility of investment or to be associated with Moroccan company to make some feasibility study, technical and economical, for investment in waste to energy in a circular economy context.
Okay, thank you very much. So it's about biomass energy and waste energy.
I think we can mention, Erich, here that yes, definitely. I mean, we had several projects, you know, in the past in the SABI, who were related in one way or another to energy, to waste management, to valorization, including biomass. I mean, I recall last year we had a project that was had a very, very interesting process in order to treat biomass, or I mean bio waste in a very efficient approach. So definitely, Hassan, I think we know it's one of the things that have to be addressed. It's been it's more, and I think there, Alfredo, it's more the opportunity for Africa and Switzerland. It's been a less impactful market, just because our energy and our valorization is built a little bit different. That makes it so less. But I think you if you are here connected, you know about SABI, you know about the program. Maybe I can ask Nicola to post on the chat again the links. You know, if you want to have a look, we have also the prior projects and communication. Yes, definitely it needs to be pushed. Again, what I have seen is that in Africa, a lot of solutions are applicable. Here in Europe, we've seen it that it's less sometimes development, or it's some specific biomass and energy development. Alfredo?
Yes, I think this is one of the interesting questions that we kind of have from time to time, which is sometimes we maybe sit on top of the opportunity, but we cannot see it unless someone says, okay, we have interest in invest in this area. So for me, I take for granted that I have all the assets here available to actually test it out and so on, but I don't have the means or the know-how, let's put it like that. So what I see is just like more and more, what do we need? It's just like, it's to have access to this kind of like, what are the things that we are looking for example. Africa has this kind of, it's like you see it from a different perspective when you are on the terrain. There is a person that goes like 100 meters and find 10, 20 ideas for business. That is like really interesting ideas and so on. But at the same time, the person that is there is not seeing the same way. It's not seeing like with that lens. For us, just like, that's why investing in people in terms of research and development to improve the lens to where they see the resources available, that is way better than you bring someone to research here, like what is available, what is possible, because we know that where are the resources and so on. So I think like you can reach out to the Afrilabs and expose like, okay, we have the needs to invest in biomass, circular economy and so on. And then from that, I think it's one of the best way to reach out to all the countries that they're in to understand, okay, what are the opportunities in biomass that are available, or can we start a program related to this? At this level, you will have not just one country, you will have 40 countries, 3 or 4 initiatives in those countries, test it out, research, and so on. And then you can have a broader sense of how this can work in Africa, not just in a specific country, but how you can see the opportunities in different countries. So reaching out to Afrilabs may be one of the ways to actually create a program that can test it out, that opportunity, using local hubs and local startups, local entrepreneurs to research a way to do that. But it needs to be at that scale. Why I say that scale? Because you will learn as fast as possible what works, what doesn't work, without access of capital to actually understand if this is an opportunity or not.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I might also mention in this framework that we have a current call that invites exactly advanced startups that work in science to come to a workshop in mid-October So we plan for Morocco, but we are not sure, of course. So depending on the health situation, it evolves internationally. But yes, so really cross fingers. So if it should not happen in Morocco, so we will do it online. But so we really would like to go there and exactly address these types of questions with startups working in the field and wishing to advance their know-how in building up the companies. I have just another look if we have maybe one or two more questions from our participants. Thank you again, Hassan, for your question. It's very much appreciated. Merci beaucoup.
De rien.
Yeah.
I hope that we can continue to develop this.
Definitely hope we can be in Morocco in autumn, even if things seems. But I think, as illustrated, that's really one of the challenges that that we'll face is the duration. How long are we stuck in only having to communicate through this until we can meet again? But for all the, I think Erich, you mentioned the call that is ongoing, and there are several calls. I think Afrilab relays some of the mentions around energy, clean tech. I think I have seen passing by several calls. I'm sure you're aware of it, Hassan, that you have looked at these options of where for new clean tech you have the possibility to find resource for that.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. That's very interesting. No, I think it's a nice framework, and exactly so as Alfredo also put it in the very beginning. So when we were just starting our conversation in a smaller group, I think it's really important to bring together these many initiatives that are now being rolled out or are already operating. So there are so many different, but also in some kind similar initiatives. And I think an association also like Afrilabs is so much like now converging initiatives, bringing together people from hubs, from the startup field, but also involving partners. So as Afrilabs now is also has been reaching out also to Europe, for example, with this African-European Innovation Partnership. There's now also a quite new initiative that aims to bring together exactly investors and startups. It is called the Grand Challenges Africa Innovation Network. This is steered by the African Academy of Sciences. So there's quite a good number of initiatives, and I think now it's really time to bring to the awareness of as many as possible. For example, through the help of hubs like Afrilabs, like you, Alfredo, have been put up in Maputo, and also to combine the know-how and to learn, as you said, to learn wherever we are. Yeah. So if there are no further questions, I just go through once again for the participants. Yes, okay. So if there are no further questions for this time now, I would like to ask Jordi and Alfredo to sum up in that sense, or to share a final phrase with us today, and then we are happy also to close the session, but also to say that slides will be available depending then on availabilities and permissions, of course, from our speakers. And there will be also footage available depending on so the final production of this video. So there are possibilities to continue our conversation afterwards. But now, Jordi or Alfredo, maybe if you would like to start with your final phrase of today's talk.
Yes, for me, I think like first appreciate this opportunity, and the second one is just like I think we need to reach out more, more than anything. We need to reach out more for the opportunities that are lying in front of us. Some of the things that Afrilab is doing in MAP, maybe it's not everything that it's possible to do, But I think together is the one word that I would leave here. That's like, whatever we want to do, just make sure that reach out to someone somewhere that is also trying to connect and solve the issue at hand. This is not COVID, it's not like Switzerland or like Maputo, Mozambique issue and so on. This is a collective issue. And I think it calls for companies that are more aware of where they are and how they connect to the ecosystem around them. And that for me is just like, let's make sure that we are truly connected, not just online and physical things. And at the end of the day, we need to put more and more initiatives that are very aware of the environment that they are built upon, not just for make money, but to improve the society that we are in. I think that's what COVID did challenge us, that we were being kind of like condescend with a reality that we were forgetting that we are part of this reality. So now we just take a step back and let's improve the reality around us, the society around us, and the business that we create. That's my takeaway.
Thank you very much, Alfredo. Jordi, please.
Yes, I can only concur with Alfredo. I can recommendations are there are a few in the slides which are very specific on the startup itself and how I can only just re-emphasize, put yourself into the duration. So protect the core team. If you have a solution, and typically, as Andy was saying, biomass important if you have solutions, etc., that we know it will be more difficult in the short term to be adopted. But definitely to find solutions for the duration or for the long term. Now, another recommendation, I think, and this is, we mentioned clean tech, social. I mean, the state will be playing a role like it had never played before. I am absolutely convinced of this. It was the case in 2006 and in 2007 and 8. They played a role like they never done before, even in the crisis of 2000. I mean, there was never, on the plans which are being officially at least announced, hopefully will involve some conditions related to environmental support, hopefully will involve some conditions related to new models of how to adapt. I am not sure of this one, but typically it relates to energy, to valorization, to waste, to all the things where we know we need to make those transitions, not counting traveling and all these other elements. But I am quite, at least I would say, positive. We've seen it in some of our startups, the ones that are related to climate, had actually attracted a lot of interest. Can we guarantee these things are going to translate? I am not certain, but are we going to have a strong case? Definitely, yes. That's what I could add. I think in the next month and years to come.
Okay, I think that's a very very nice closing also of the session. So I would like to thank you again, Jordi. Thank you, Alfredo, really for your time. You are both entrepreneurs, and your time is really money, so thank you very much. It was the first edition of the SARECO webinars. I hope that those who could join did enjoy. Please stay in touch with us. There are various ways of connecting to Alfredo, to Jordi, to us as the Swiss African Research Corporation. So pleased to have you had all on board, and I wish you a good continuation. And of course, so let's hope that many of us can implement your suggestions and recommendations formulated today. So thank you very much again, and hope to see you again soon. Goodbye.
Thank you, Erich. Goodbye. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.